Today, I will be interpreting How Do You Live for You. This is a Japanese novel first published in 1937, which has been a long-time bestseller in Japan for over 80 years. In 2018, it even topped the Japanese book sales chart, truly making it a national reader's staple. The latest work of the animation master Hayao Miyazaki is adapted from this novel, which he purchased when he was 15 years old and still cherishes to this day. How Do You Live is a profound narrative that intertwines the personal growth of a young boy with philosophical musings about life, society, and personal ethics. First published in 1937 in Japan, where it has influenced multiple generations, this classic has been eloquently translated into English by Bruno Navasky, making its timeless wisdom accessible to a global audience. The addition of a foreword by acclaimed author Neil Gaiman helps frame the novel's significance in a modern context, highlighting its enduring relevance. The story follows a 15-year-old boy, nicknamed Copper, in Tokyo as he navigates the challenges of adolescence amidst the complexities of pre-war Japan. After the death of his father, Copper turns to his thoughtful uncle for guidance, who provides him with both moral and intellectual lessons. These dialogues are interwoven with Copper's daily experiences, which test and develop his understanding of his uncle's teachings. In this book, Genzaburo Yoshino uses a 14-year-old boy named Copper as the narrator to recount his coming-of-age story and his dialogues with his uncle, where he poses questions and his uncle provides advice and answers. While this might sound like a children's book, it is far from simple. Yoshino reaffirms some straightforward yet powerful social science common sense in this book, the kind of common sense that supported the growth of Japan's post-war generation of intellectuals. Maruyama Masao, a renowned Japanese political and historical scholar, commented on this book. It not only discusses how one should live life, but also explores what constitutes knowledge in the realm of social sciences. It begins with the boy's observations and experiences of everyday things, and step by step, teaches a 14-year-old boy that the seemingly ordinary things contain complex social relationships, which are not simple at all. Next, we will explore some specific life propositions by following the growth experiences of this boy named Copernicus. The first part discusses ways of recognizing things. The second part discusses our relationships with others and the rules of how society operates. The third part discusses how to face the pain brought on by mistakes, ways of recognizing things. First, let's get to know Copernicus. Copper is 14 and has just started middle school. He is smaller than his actual age, which bothers him a lot. During physical education class, when the teacher arranges the lineup by height, he always secretly stands on a small stone to make himself appear taller. Although he is one of the shortest in his class, his academic performance is the exact opposite, rarely falling below third place. But this doesn't mean he's just a bookworm. In fact, he's quite mischievous, and during home visits, the teacher always says, "I have nothing to say about his grades, but," followed by a series of how mischievous Copper is and how he troubles the teacher. Copper's father was an employee at a major bank and passed away 2 years ago. Since then, the family moved from the city to the suburbs, and the number of visitors has decreased significantly compared to when his father was alive, except for his uncle who lives nearby and visits often. His uncle, his mother's younger brother, who graduated from university not long ago and studied law, has a special relationship with Copernicus. They often walk together or play catch in a grassy field. The nickname Copper was given by his uncle, who wanted Copper to learn a certain way of viewing things. What kind of way? We'll discuss this bit by bit. Being young, Copper is curious about everything. Once, he and his uncle went to the rooftop of a department store in Tokyo's Ginza during a light rain. Cooper was motionless, captivated by the sight before him. From above, the bustling Ginza streets made the cars look like beetles scurrying in all directions. Born and raised in Tokyo, this was the first time Cooper saw the city from this perspective, which deeply moved him. Yoshino writes, "At this moment, Tokyo appeared to Cooper like a boundless sea, with tall buildings like rocks breaching the surface, and the rain-laden sky hanging low over the sea. Immersed in his imagination, Cooper vaguely felt that many people lived in this sea. Cooper asked his uncle, 'How many people can you see from here?' His uncle replied, 'If you can see a tenth or an eighth of Tokyo from here, then it would contain a tenth or an eighth of Tokyo's population.'" Cooper fell silent, looking out at Tokyo under the rain, with hundreds of thousands, millions of people each having their thoughts, living their lives, like the tide, coming in and going out each morning and evening. Then Cooper looked up and saw the nearby buildings, each window lit up, feeling as if someone he didn't know might be watching him. Cooper found it strange, observing his own self being observed by others, falling into a long silence. At this moment, his uncle noticed and asked what Cooper was thinking. Unsure how to respond, Cooper simply said he felt it was very strange. His uncle widened his eyes, then calmly said, "You must remember this moment. This moment is very important." The reason his uncle said this was because this moment subtly included our way of recognizing the world. Back at home, his uncle took out a notebook and wrote a letter to Copernicus. In the letter, he said, "What you felt today is, each person is a part of the vast world. Everyone gathered together creates this world, moving with the waves of the world, living." Cooper's story might be familiar to many. Before Cooper proposed the heliocentric theory, everyone believed what they saw, thinking that the sun and stars revolved around the earth. But Cooper insisted that the earth he lived on was actually just a celestial body moving in the vast universe. The difficulty in the shift from geocentrism to heliocentrism wasn't just accepting new knowledge, but changing a way of thinking, shifting from being self-centered to considering oneself merely a part of the world. His uncle wrote, "People are used to thinking about and judging things from a self-centered perspective, a deeply ingrained idea that even adults find difficult to change. As you grow older, you'll realize that people who can abandon this way of thinking are truly rare in the vast world, especially when personal interests are involved. Making objective and correct judgments is very challenging. If you can maintain Cooper's way of thinking even in such situations, it would be truly remarkable." This is why his uncle called him Copernicus, to encourage him to break away from self-centered thinking. Moreover, his uncle was moved by Cooper's earnest experience of the state of the world. In another letter he said, "Many great philosophers, writers, and artists have left us words full of profound wisdom. But the most important thing is not others, but yourself. You must look from your own leaf, feel from multiple perspectives, to understand the true meaning of those words, not just blindly follow them. The key is always to start from your genuine feelings, the things that truly move you, and continually think about their significance. You need to seriously consider in what situations you feel certain things, how you feel, so that through specific emotions or unique, once-in-a-lifetime experiences, you can find meaning, thus generating your own thoughts." So simply put, the way of recognizing things that his uncle passed on to Cooper includes 2 points. One is to break away from being self-centered, and the other is to start from your own genuine feelings and experiences. This was his guidance to Copernicus, who was curious about everything at the time and gradually building his understanding of the world. As Cooper's life unfolds, he gradually meets many people completely different from his own character and life, including the poor and the rich, bullies and those who are bullied. How can he further understand himself and this society in these relationships? His uncle also shared some of his thoughts with Copernicus. In the next part, we'll discuss these issues. Our relationship with society. In school, Cooper is closest to two people, Mizutani and Kitami. Mizutani is tall and always composed, and he and Cooper have known each other since elementary school, often playing together. Kitami is as short as Copernicus, fearless in any situation, and the classmates call him Little Stubborn. Cooper initially didn't think much of Kitami, but his view changed because of Uragawa. Uragawa is the most frequently teased person in the class. He's not good at sports, whether it's throwing balls or running, and his clumsiness sometimes makes even the teachers laugh. His academics aren't good either. He's known as the class sleepyhead. Besides that, he always appears very poor. Uragawa's family sells tofu, while most of his classmates' parents are well-known entrepreneurs, officials, professors, doctors, or lawyers, making his clothes and belongings quite different. The classmates often mock him for eating fried tofu slices every day, even directly calling Uragawa fried tofu slice. Once, during a class meeting where everyone was to vote for someone to give a speech or recitation on stage, Cooper was thinking about whom to write when he received a small note passed to him, which read, "Let fried tofu slice give the speech." Cooper immediately understood that someone wanted Uragawa to go on stage and then mock him coldly. The note was wildly passed around the class, with someone deliberately asking Uragawa, "Who's fried tofu slice?" Uragawa's face turned bright red. At this moment, Little Stubborn Kitami stood up and said to Yamaguchi, who nicknamed Uragawa fried tofu slice, "That's too mean." Yamaguchi immediately spat at Kitami, then the two started fighting. The result was Kitami pinning Yamaguchi to the ground, while Uragawa held Kitami from behind, trying to stop him. Soon the teacher arrived, investigated the situation, and severely reprimanded Yamaguchi, but Kitami was also warned. After that day, Cooper looked at Kitami in a new light, and the two became closer. By that winter, as the weather grew colder, Uragawa suddenly missed several days of school, saying he was sick. If a classmate is absent for more than 3 days, friends usually visit together, but Uragawa didn't have such friends. Cooper noticed this and suddenly wanted to visit Uragawa. That day after school, instead of playing soccer with Kitami, Cooper went to Uragawa's house alone. Uragawa's home was in a narrow alley. The shops on both sides of the alley were closely packed, with low eaves that one could reach by raising a hand, making Cooper feel like he was walking into a dim tunnel. Finally, he heard the sound of selling tofu, and a robust woman in her 40s or 50s was continuously calling out in front of the store, Uragawa's mother. Cooper approached and asked if Uragawa was there. The woman turned towards the shop and shouted, "Uragawa, your friend is here." At that moment, Uragawa was wearing an apron, holding a pair of long bamboo chopsticks, frying tofu. Cooper asked, "Aren't you sick?" Uragawa hesitated without responding, and his mother took over the conversation, explaining that the young worker at the store had a cold and they were short-handed, so Uragawa had to stay and help in the store. Uragawa then continued frying tofu while chatting with Copernicus. He said, "If I don't fry it now, I won't make it in time to sell it in the evening." Cooper watched as Uragawa skillfully used the bamboo chopsticks to pick up the fried tofu, shake off the oil, and then throw it onto the wire net next to him, then use the chopsticks to neatly arrange the fried tofu. Cooper couldn't help but blurt out, "You're really good at this." After all the tofu was fried, Uragawa took Cooper to his room. Cooper asked Uragawa when he would be able to return to school. Uragawa said he had to wait for his father to come back. Uragawa's family urgently needed money, and his father had gone back to his hometown to raise funds and hadn't returned yet, possibly because the money hadn't been raised. When Uragawa talked about these things, his face gradually clouded over with a gloom only adults have. He specifically reminded Copernicus, "Don't tell anyone, okay? My mom still thinks I don't know about these things." Cooper felt an indescribable heaviness in his heart, not knowing what to say to Uragawa. After some time, Cooper prepared to go home, and before leaving he promised Uragawa he would come again next Wednesday to tutor him in English and math. To express his gratitude, Uragawa proposed to show Cooper how to operate the machine that grinds beans in the shop next time. Cooper shared all experiences related to Uragawa with his uncle, of course keeping his promise not to mention Uragawa's father's situation. After hearing this, his uncle asked Cooper a question. "What do you think is the biggest difference between you and Uragawa?" Cooper fell into thought, not knowing how to answer. That night, his uncle wrote another letter to Cooper in his notebook. Before this, his uncle had told Cooper that each of us is a part of the world, and we are all connected to form this world. So, what connects these individuals? His uncle used a common term in economics and sociology in the letter, production relations. We are connected through a complex network of production relations. Specifically, humans need various things to survive, so we must use various materials from nature to manufacture them. In this process, we sometimes cooperate and sometimes divide labor, and the relationships developed in this process are called production relations. Initially, we easily know how we cooperate and divide labor. We don't need to think too much to understand who we should thank for having food to eat and clothes to wear. But as settlements expand, the scale of cooperation and division of labor also expands, making the relationships increasingly complex. Today, we can hardly know who exactly is involved in producing our food and clothes. Our livelihood has become a set of monetary figures, not a specific person or a specific relationship. His uncle wrote in his letter, "The world is so vast. We obviously can't know everyone, but our clothing, food, housing, and necessities have long connected us all together, and no one can be detached from this relationship." Knowing this, we will have a deeper understanding when we look at the diverse people in society. People who work in harsh environments and those who work in relatively relaxed environments seem to have no intersection in daily life, but in reality, we are closely interwoven through the network of production relations. Uragawa's family situation isn't very good, but there are many people in the world who don't even have a home like Uragawa's. Think about the young people who work for Uragawa's family. They work day and night, perhaps hoping to open a shop like Uragawa's family one day. Their hard work turns into food that enters many families' dining tables. Therefore, we must care about these people, not just consider our own happiness. Additionally, his uncle particularly reminded Cooper that those who grew up in poverty and started physical labor after finishing elementary school, even as adults, might not have as much knowledge as Copernicus. If you only look at it from this angle, you might easily think you are better than those people, or even think that they didn't learn these things because they didn't work hard enough. But from another perspective, they are the ones who support this world, and a large amount of essential goods are the products of their labor. His uncle believes there are two types of people in the world: those whose production exceeds consumption, and those whose consumption exceeds production. And this is the difference between Uragawa and Copernicus. His uncle said, "Never overlook the difference between producers and consumers. Once you think about it this way, you'll be amazed to find that among those driving luxury cars, living in mansions and looking down on others, many are worthless. You will also discover, among the people despised by the world, how many are worthy of respect. Of course, his uncle wasn't blaming Cooper for only consuming and not producing. His uncle wanted to guide Cooper to think, what do you produce every day? Have you produced anything remarkable? His uncle said, you must remember this question. It would be good if you can find the answer in the future. In my opinion, since we are born human, no matter who, we must find this answer in our lifetime. All right, here. His uncle has taught Cooper about the way of recognizing and understanding society, but no matter how deep our knowledge and understanding are, we inevitably make mistakes. The last lesson his uncle taught Cooper in the book is about how to face mistakes and the pain that comes with them. How to face mistakes and pain. We still have to return to Cooper's experiences in school. The event happened on a snowy day when everyone was distracted from class, thinking only about the white snow outside. When the last class ended, Cooper sprang up like a spring, rushed to the sports field, quickly made 3 or 4 snowballs, and threw them fiercely at Mizutani and Kitami as they came out of the classroom. After that, the 3 of them started frolicking madly on the sports field. There was a snowman in one corner of the field, and Cooper hid behind it, thinking about how to ambush. But then he noticed Mizutani and Kitami had disappeared. He searched around, then turned back to find a crowd gathered near the snowman. Cooper ran back and saw Mizutani and Kitami being surrounded by 5 or 6 older students, who menacingly demanded that Mizutani and Kitami apologize for destroying the snowman. Mizutani stood up straight and replied that he had no idea what was going on. At this moment, an older student named Kurokawa yelled, "Just apologize nicely, and we'll let you go." Mizutani quietly said, "Sorry." Cooper breathed a sigh of relief. But the older students weren't satisfied, saying the apology was too quiet. Then Mizutani raised his head and shouted a loud sorry, his tone as if he had slapped the other party. The older students were completely angered and threatened to teach Mizutani a lesson. Cooper stood by and panicked, unable to step forward to admit that it was he who had damaged the snowman, nor could he leave. Then an older student stepped forward, about to punch Mizutani, when a figure rushed out. It was Uragawa. Uragawa stood in front of the older students and excitedly said, "It definitely wasn't Mizutani." The older students pushed Uragawa aside, then slapped Mizutani hard. Seeing that they hadn't stopped, Uragawa and Kitami rushed forward simultaneously to protect Mizutani. Cooper panicked even more, thinking if he was going to stand up, it had to be now, but he couldn't take that step, just standing there watching Mizutani, Uragawa, and Kitami being knocked to the ground. The bell rang and the older students left a few words and departed. Mizutani stood up, furiously hit the snowman, breaking it in half, then hugged Kitami and started crying. 5 or 6 meters away, Cooper stood there listlessly, unable to raise his head. He stood there for what felt like minutes, realizing Mizutani and the others were heading back to the school building. Cooper thought if he was going to apologize, it had to be now, but his body seemed nailed to the spot, unable to move. Eventually, Mizutani and the others left, and only Cooper remained on the sports field, the chance to apologize gone. Cooper felt he had betrayed his friends, completely losing the right to join them. That day, after returning home, Cooper hardly ate dinner. His mother touched his forehead and found he had a fever, then immediately made the bed and had Cooper lie down. Lying in bed, Cooper kept crying, even intentionally pushing away the blanket, thinking it would be better if he became even sicker. After half a month, Copernicus, whose cold had worsened, hadn't gone to school. Previously, even with a cold, Cooper would force himself to go to school, but this time he chose to stay at home, too scared to go to school. Cooper felt immense disgust whenever he thought about how cowardly and despicable he had been at that moment. This continued for a long time until one day his uncle came to visit Copernicus. Cooper told his uncle everything that had happened, and his uncle suddenly became serious, speaking intensely to Copernicus. "You must first apologize to Mizutani and the others like a man, telling them your apology exactly as it is in your heart." Mizutani and the others might not be angry anymore, and might be friends with you like before, or they might still be angry and break off relations with you. But even if they break off relations, you can't complain about anything. Copernicus, you must now muster the courage, no matter how painful, since it's a result you caused, you must be mentally prepared. Cooper looked at his uncle and nodded silently. His uncle also wrote another letter in his notebook to Copernicus. His uncle said, "We live in this world, whether as children or adults, and we encounter various kinds of sadness and pain. No one wants to experience pain, but pain actually has significant meaning. We often realize there's something wrong with our bodies because of physical pain. We realize what state our bodies should be in. Similarly, because of the pain in our hearts, we can see what kind of people we really are. All creatures on Earth can feel pain, but there's a kind of pain only humans can feel." His uncle felt this pain was realizing one had made an irreparable mistake. But humans are also great precisely because of this point. Because we feel pain from making mistakes, we have the possibility to learn from mistakes, to draw strength to move forward from them. This certainly isn't an easy thing. His uncle quoted the famous words of the French thinker Pascal in the book. Pascal once said a famous phrase, "I can only commend those who cry while they pursue." After this, Cooper wrote an apology letter to his friends, and they reconciled. Cooper also welcomed his 15th birthday, about to become a second-year middle school student, sensing that he was slowly transitioning from a child to an adult. Previously, he couldn't comfortably swing a baseball bat used by adults, but now he could play with his father's baseball bat. In the spring, Cooper wrote a letter to his uncle in his notebook saying, "Uncle, I've started to feel that I must become a truly good person. Just as Uncle said, I'm a consumer expert. I haven't produced anything, but I can be a good person, and then there will be one more good person in the world. If I can achieve this, I might create more for the world." All right, here, this book has been introduced to you. Let's review and summarize it again. Gensaburo Yoshino recorded the growth of a boy named Cooper in this book, and through his uncle's mouth, passed on some simple truths about society and life to the boy. This book reminds us to shift from viewing the world centered around ourselves to positioning ourselves within the world, while recognizing that the world connects each of us tightly together through a network of production relations. Therefore, we cannot ignore others and only consider our own happiness. Additionally, we will always make mistakes, and we will always feel immense pain from irreparable mistakes. But pain definitely has its meaning. We must learn to introspect in pain and find the strength to move forward. The book's title is How Do You Live? But this question actually appears only at the end of the book. Gensaburo Yoshino wrote, "The long story comes to a close. And finally, I want to ask everyone a question. How do you want to live your life?" This is a difficult question, and it seems that it's a question only we can answer for ourselves, so let's leave it for each of us to answer. Thank you for listening to this book. You can find the link to the book in the description below.